Greg going to be on today, or?
Yeah, should be. He was at the previous call.
Great.
How's everyone doing?
Great.
Greg's here.
Yeah.
Cool.
He's back. He lives.
Hey there. Sorry, I was having a device issues.
All right. Well, we are on live on air, so it's good timing.
Neat. Christian, thank you. We received your gift, the wedding gift. Thank you so much. That was really kind of you.
Yeah. Sorry I couldn't make it, but that should do good.
No worries. All right. Well, let's get started. We have a lot of updates. Yeah. I was away for the closing of the sale. By the way, the sale is closed for anyone who wants to know. But Ed and the rest of the team were handling it many times more professionally without me. So we have some really good news on the update. Ed, did you want to mention that?
Oh, absolutely. So like Greg mentioned, we're still closing people that made previous intentions or commitments, and so this number will rise a little bit in the coming days. Our intent is to wrap up the existing sale process within a matter of days. The number that we've taken in so far is $9.3 million. And the market has changed since those transactions were closed. So the market value is somewhere around $8.5 million, which is just totally awesome. These are pre-tax dollars, I should say. We're still figuring out how much of that is owed in taxes, but it's tremendous. And so I guess I want to make sure we give a really warm thank you to all those that are on this call or on YouTube later for supporting the platform, for having confidence in us, and really a heartfelt thank you from all of us.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Ed, you said something to me that was pretty significant. You said that going through this high touch process, which was really forced upon us because of security issues, had this knock-on effect that we could connect with the community members who are supporting the project, and they get to know us and we get to know them. And it's almost as if we planned it, because we're
exactly
we're trying to build a community here, and that's our one of our number one goals is to build a community, because otherwise, without that kind of spirit of community, how does decentralization work?
Yeah, and it's
so
exactly, and it was so fun talking to such a diversity of folks from all around the world. Some people were extremely transactional, either because of their personality or whatever. Some people, were a bit more interested in the trading and the economics of the rock and what they were purchasing and how soon it would be listed on an exchange and those kinds of questions, and the theoretical market cap and so forth. And other people really wanted to understand the vision. They affirmed that they were in this for the long term, that they asked how they could help. Or when I, asked them, what is it that you do in your day job and in your normal, and they would talk about it. And some would say, for example, well, I don't see how I could contribute to RChain. Then I would ask, and I would say, well, here's some ways. And they said, oh yeah, well, I'd be happy to help in that way, or to introduce these friends of mine. And so that high touch collaboration or interview process did bear some fruit, I will say, through some introductions and follow-up that we're having. And so yeah, it was painful from an effort perspective, but it's bearing fruit. And so again, just thanks to everybody that participated. I also wanted to say that as a result of the awareness building through this whole process had, and the introductions, some conversations are continuing, but it's really a different conversation now with investors that are considering purchasing rock at sort of the $1 million and more amount. So the co-op board needs to decide kind of how we'll negotiate through those conversations, but it's really a separate program or from there. Potentially different terms may be offered when we're talking at those levels, or groups of purchasers. So wanted the community to be aware that those conversations are happening, but there's been some of the details of how that will play out are still being worked out and negotiated on. That probably will be negotiated at with a group of investors. Typically, these things, there's a lead negotiator that is either individually as a VC or private equity or family fund that negotiates the terms, and then the rest follow. But that's just I'll say that none of those terms have been negotiated to date, and we'll having those conversations along with Steve Cariaga, Greg Heiss, David Otto, and others. Yeah.
Well, there's a segue there that, or at least a connection that I think is important. The membership meeting for the co-op is on the 24th of October. If you have any interest or concerns about those conversations or anything else that's related to co-op business, please come to the membership meeting. That's a place where and a time where we come together as a community and we formulate the issues that the co-op board needs to focus on, and that's when the community gives guidance to the board in terms of its vision and understanding of the RChain co-op. So please, come in person if you can, and if you can't, then we will set up a Zoom or other or Skype channels for people to be able to participate. We're in the midst of working out the voting strategy for this membership meeting. This is an ongoing process. It's an evolutionary process. If we can't pull off our vision of a crypto-based voting mechanism by that time, then we will definitely have one for upcoming votes. But the aim, the stretch goal here is to have a crypto-based voting mechanism for the membership meeting, and you've seen that we've had some significant efforts in this regard over the last several months. But we want to make sure that the process has the highest level of quality and integrity, and that people can review the process and feel comfortable with it. So those are some other things that are related to what we've been talking about with respect to the private sale. Again, I can't emphasize enough. Please attend in whatever capacity you can, and give us guidance.
Yeah, and also on Discord, please put if you can or can't attend. It's helpful to have these agenda items pretty well worded and proposals in front of the community, so that can be discussed even ahead of the actual meeting. So as specific or general as a proposal as you want to put out there, it'd be great to get those on Discord.
And I can add some more color to that too. So for agenda items to be voted on, we have a project in GitHub right now. It's just called the members meeting October 24th. That's a project in GitHub, and you can attach issues to that. So there's already an issue around voting 106, but you can also propose new agenda items to be voted on. One thing I will say about agenda items or things that need to be voted on, they need to be, by the time they make it onto the agenda, they need to be clear. So it's either a yes/no vote or a list of options, like 4 options or 2 options that need to be this is what we want. After the meeting, like Greg said, we'll have time, or after the formal part, I should say, there'll be time for question and answer, things to feedback to the board, which will come next meeting and through the next part of the governance process. Also, more information about the meeting itself. This will all go out also in more digital form. There'll be an RSVP, so you can let us know if you're coming. There'll be it'll be at the Washington Hall, and I'll provide all of this in the RSVP, the address, the time, all that other stuff. And we're looking for community volunteers. Jacob has already kind of volunteered a little bit to plan some other activities, either before or after. So if there are other events that we want to put on besides the formal meeting, do let us know, and we can kind of coordinate that as people kind of flow in throughout that day or that week. So, and if there are any other questions, please let me know. We have a draft agenda already. Evan and I will be putting out a link on Discord soon here so that everybody can see it and comment. Last thing I'll say about this is we're also looking for to staff 3 committees. So we'll have a governance committee, a compensation committee, and I think the last one, well, what we need members to join those committees, and we need boards members to chair those committees. And all of this will be coming out in a bit more digital format, so you can kind of read and preview. But I wanted to get it out there as soon as we could.
How about on creating new committees? Is that an option for if there happens to be a good reason for a new?
I think I haven't talked to Evan about new committees, but he would be the one that knows the bylaws the best. I'm not sure if it can, so I don't know. I can't comment, but my guess would be we can ask Evan in accordance with the bylaws, right?
What's the name of the project? I don't see it.
It should be called Meeting October 24th. I can see if I can find it again. I created it last week, I think. At least I think I did. If I didn't, I should have.
I like this idea of GitHub hallucinations. We've been working so hard; it's completely understandable. Also, we should create a committee for creating committees. Okay. While we're looking for the links, also some additional updates. We're starting to gain traction in the wider world. So it turns out that through our conversations with Resonate.io, we were put in touch with a group in New York that has also seen the value of the cooperative model in the decentralization movement, and so they are organizing a fairly well attended and high profile co-op platform conference in New York on the 10th and 11th, and they have invited RChain to speak. So I'll be speaking on behalf of the RChain community in New York on either the 10th or the 11th. I don't know the exact date of my talk. So if anyone in the community is in New York, I invite them to come out. Additionally, for the 3rd year running, we have been invited to present a DevCon, Ethereum DevCon. So we will be talking about Rolang, introducing Rolang, and I'm really hoping that we can talk a little bit about our ERC20 token contracts there, as well as give people a general introduction to Rolang and the concepts behind Rolang, and in particular to the idea of behavioral typing as a practical language device that can be employed in lots of languages. For example, Solidity, JavaScript, and other kinds of languages. So this sets us up to make a much bigger contact so that people can understand the real depth of the value proposition in RChain. So that's fairly good. And then another thing that people should be aware of is that in mid-November, between so from the 12th through the 17th, I believe, we are we're having a developer retreat. So we're going to be going in and sort of doing the Vulcan mind meld thing, to make sure that we have a good, clear focus on our deliverables over the next year. We want to story point out all of the milestones from here to Mercury, and also nail down some things like some gaps in specs and documentation. That that is now kind of in the air and in people's heads, but not on committed to paper or other kinds of communication media. So I'm excited about that, because we're hoping that out of this effort grows a developer convention for RChain next year, somewhere after the launch of Mercury. We want to have our first developer convention for RChain, and we're looking at this as kind of the genesis, the zero version of this, yeah. So I'm excited. I really want to begin to expand the conversation with our community of developers, but please be aware that this is the retreat in November is really just for the core team, but we are looking to expand this again with this eye to radical transparency. Let's see, what other updates do we have? I have some
just a quick update about speaking engagements. Yeah, so people are reaching out to us, and Lawrence Lerner's also working his network to line up more speaking engagements in the Seattle area. Here, there's a group talking about technology infrastructure in Washington State, and I was invited to speak about blockchain. And I know that Kenny Rowe also is working this blockchain workshop along with Lawrence, and that's in, remind me when that is, Kenny, is that November or late October?
It's October, yeah.
Yeah, so late October. So, word about RChain is getting around.
And just want to make sure that, so we announced about the addition of our new director, is that correct?
Yes, Vlad Zamfir. Yeah, that press release went out.
Oh, awesome. But did we talk about it last Wednesday?
Yeah, a bit, but please feel free to elaborate, because I think your perspective is also extremely valuable.
Well, I'm just thrilled, that Vlad decided to join as a director. One of the things about Vlad that I don't know if people know, that as free and easygoing as he appears, he has this enormous sense of responsibility. One of the things that I was talking with Primavera one day, and we were sort of we were both trying to identify this underlying trait that we both sensed, and like at the same time we came up with the characterization of this incredible sense of responsibility. And so having someone with that level of integrity and that level of sense of responsibility to the community and to some of our global issues, I think is an enormous addition to the RChain community. So that's what makes me so excited. Also, I've been working with another developer, Danny Ryan, and RChain is going to be funding Danny to help Vlad get his Casper repo into consumable shape. So with documentation and other things. So that conversation is underway as well, and I'm excited about that. I would like to, if any members of the team, I mean, one of the nice things was we had a developer stand up this morning, just before the community hangout. So we had some nice updates. And is Meta on the call?
I'm here. Yes, I'm right here.
Awesome. You ran a great meeting.
Oh, thank you.
And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the upcoming VM sprint and what's planned there and how that fits into the roadmap.
I sure can. So I'm showing my screen here very quickly. So we are marching towards a milestone called Roscala.void. And this is basically an empty VM that will have, we will be setting up continuous integration, building, testing, as well as 4 basic opcodes and these stretch goals, these other opcodes. We will have some unit test stubs as well. Part of this work also is going to involve cleaning up the GitHub repository, which I will share as well, because that's planned for this week as an action item to make the project, bring the project to life, make it very, very standardized so we can onboard more developers rapidly if we need to accelerate the project, have standard methodologies for check-in and check-out and unit testing, and ensure that all pull requests have passed unit tests before we put any eyes on them for review. So this is Roscala.void. This is the first milestone in Roscala. We are also embarking on a good deal of planning around the Roscala project. As you'll see here, we have 5 milestones that we've tentatively specified, and we're spending time in this sprint to go through and identify how we're going to break up the work in the port according to these 5 big buckets. Our intention is to story point all of the work, specify it, story point it, and then come back with an estimate in terms of level of effort and timelines to get the port done. I expect that .void will be ready to demo in 2 weeks. We should be exiting the sprint with it complete, and very excited to share, success on this first milestone. Also have an update around GitHub. The team's been working hard on trying to simplify and clean up how the code is structured and organized in GitHub. Our goal is to have a really delightful user experience for developers that want to download the RChain package. They would get a single package that has all the dependencies, everything they need to get started, and we would like our GitHub repository to mirror that. So we will be modifying the GitHub repository to match this high-level structure, where you've got a top-level RChain repo and underneath it, the associated subdirectories with all of the meat of what would be in the RChain package. Of course, these other high-level repositories would remain untouched, right? We would just be making some changes here in terms of moving the C++ VM under the RChain repo. Everything pertaining to RChain will be, in terms of the actual code, deliverables, documentation, will be stored under a single repository. Are there any questions around this or concerns?
Yes, I was wondering, is there a vegan and gluten-free option?
If there is one, I'm on board for that because I'm definitely gluten-free. I don't know about vegan, but I'm definitely gluten-free.
No, this is wonderful. I don't know if people remember, but when we were working with Special K, we had to do a similar kind of thing. We had broken up Special K into several different independent repos, but partly when you make a commitment to the Scala ecosystem, the build tool situation has become quite monoculture at the moment. So SBT is really your only option for workable build tools. It used to be that Maven was a decent option, but that has kind of fallen by the wayside, and the newer options are still not ready for prime time. So SBT, which is just barely ready for prime time, even at this stage, is really the only option for industrial scale development. And it is not really set up for multi-repo development.
it's an extremely painful experience, both for developers, in the RChain core team and developers who are more loosely affiliated with RChain. It's a very, very painful experience. So having essentially one repo to rule them all and one repo to bind them is a sorry, I was just in Hobbiton, so I had to make the reference. It makes it a lot smoother and simpler from the point of view of the build process, and then also from the point of view of continuous integration. So those are some technical drivers for this, apart from the kind of cultural drivers of having one access point in terms of people being able to have a smooth, easy experience. Of course, this is all going to explode once other projects start picking up RChain and doing all kinds of things that we never imagined with it. But from the point of view of what the co-op is delivering to the community, this is I'm very heartened to see this development. It's really, really good.
Awesome.
And yeah, cool. This is good news. Go ahead.
Okay, so in addition, I want to share our current sprint. So this is our sprint that is currently in progress. We are now in sprint 3. The focus of the sprint is to rehab, finish Rosette.void, and finalize the Rosette milestone plan. So we have tickets and work pertaining to that, pertaining to those 3 goals, and we're on track to achieve those. Quick report on our velocity. I'm very pleased to report that we exited sprint 2 meeting, actually a little bit exceeding our commitment of 114 story points. And the team definitely is becoming more familiar with estimating and breaking down their work and capturing that work in the form of tickets. So we're making great progress. I'm very, very pleased. Our current sprint commitment is about 77, 80 story points, because we have several discussions and planning meetings. So in terms of actual effort and coding tickets, we took on a little bit less because we knew we'd be spending a lot of cycles on planning the sprint. And that's my update if there's no questions. Oh, I'll take questions now.
No, this is really awesome. At the dev stand-up, I was encouraging members of the team to kind of noodle on the idea of a cryptocurrency-based story pointing system. I think there could be all kinds of cool stuff where, if you are good at your story point estimating and spending, then that corresponds to being able to trade them for other kinds of resources, such as headcount or other things, and other kinds of resource allocation. So, for example, direct access to budget or something like that. I don't know what the right solution there is, but I think it would be really, really nice, especially if we want to begin to decentralize the development process. Right. So, if anyone out there in the community has a thinks that this wild and crazy idea might have legs, reach out to us and talk to us. There might even be bounties in it.
I love that idea. Thanks, Greg.
Yeah.
With that respect, I would like to mention Git token. That's a project that measures all activities that happen on GitHub, and it converts it to a reward for it. So that's all based on smart contracts and so. And the end of the month, it's going to be launched, I think.
Excellent, very good. No, it's yeah. This is the kind of thing we want to track and see if we can connect with. Also, just as a short digression, on the flight back, I was skimming a study that a much larger scale study than any I've seen done before, that has used the statistics from GitHub to argue fairly convincingly for the benefits of strongly typed languages. See if I can find the link and post it, but it was a much bigger statistical study on the benefits of strongly typed languages, and I'd love to see you know, some additional connection between these kind of statistical studies and crypto-based motivations, especially around project management. So I think that's another connection with the excellent work that we're seeing the Meta and the team do. So, are there any other updates, Meta, on this on how we're tracking?
No, I mean, that's my update for this week.
Sweet. Joe, did you want to give any updates on the cost model, or do you want to wait until we do a review? Is Joe on today?
Yeah, Joe's on. Sorry, I had to find a window where Zoom was.
Okay.
Sure, yeah, I can do it because I think it's all pretty much sound. So if you give me a second, I'll find a way to share. Let's see. All right. Cool. Everybody got me?
Yeah.
All right. So in general, the idea of, or the point where we're at in the cost model right now is to find a way to create a framework essentially for annotating source language elements with respective costs as much as we can statically. So to do this, I define essentially what is a cost monoid, sorry, here, I'll say it like this. Our costs or our annotations are represented in the form of a quadruple. Or you can think of them as vectors with 4 components, whatever you want to call it. C being the cost of compute or cycle CPU, whatever you want to call it. M being the cost of memory, storage being the cost of storage, and N being the cost of network access. So each of those components kind of will or each of those components will be associated with different language elements. For example, if I'm annotating a primitive that only exists in memory and for whatever, you know, and we can be sure that we're not storing it to the blockchain for whatever reason, then that primitive will occupy some amount of memory. And given a cost of memory, I can annotate that primitive with the cost of memory times the size of that primitive. So in general, we create what's called a cost monad. And the cost monad, like any other monad, comes with essentially 3, or it comes with a constructor, which I represent as annote T. It comes with a unit function, and it comes with a join function. Annote T, or the annotation, is simply a way that we create an annotation function for a given language element. And annote T is actually, so like I said, it's a constructor. Well, what is it constructing? Annote T constructs a computation that takes a row, so that's a language element, something of the source language, and produces that same language element with the annotation. And yeah, exactly. Okay. So in addition to those, or to the constructor annote T, we have what's called the unit function. And the unit function is essentially our way of lifting values into a monadic context. So it says, where T represents cost, it says, if you give me a cost, then I'll return you a computation that takes a row and returns that row with that cost. So this essentially allows me to, for example, give you the cost of memory, and then and then return a computation that takes a row, say language element that represents an integer, and returns that element along with the cost of that element. Right, so this is mostly what we're going to use for our terminal symbols or primitives, etc. And it essentially just gives us a way to, it's like a way that we can take our bottom elements, essentially our terminals, and create and lift them into a monadic context. The third function, this is actually, obviously kind of what defines a monad and where things get interesting, is the join function. And actually, anybody who's familiar with the state monad will notice that this is largely similar to the state monad. There's an enormous body of work that's dedicated to the state monad. It's applied in various ways over the past what I want to say is 30 years. So essentially, and we'll also recognize that the join unit and constructors are similar to that of the state monad. The join function is, like I said, where things get interesting, and it's primarily responsible for allowing us to thread state between different computations, right? And the entire motivation for the state monad in general was to allow stateful yet immutable, or stateful pure functions, right? So something that takes something and only returns essentially one value, right? What the state function does is it takes an annotation of an annotation and collapses that into a single annotation. And it does this by threading the state that's returned, or the row that's returned from the first annotation into the second annotation. So for example, join of two annotations here, we have something that takes a row and returns a function that applies that row to the first annotation. Okay, so we can see that after annotating the values that we're returning, we're binding to row prime and the second one that we're returning, or which is actually an annotation, right? And this is primarily because we passed an annotation as our value to the first annotation. So the value that we're returning is going to be an annotation. It then takes this annotation that was returned and threads this first return state into the second one, right? And finally produces a state that's been modified twice along with the costs of that state, which we're saying here are language elements. So we annotate the language element using the first annotation. We get an annotation back along with an updated language element. We take this language element and then annotate that. And what we get back is that language element along with the cost of that language element. And this is just the kind of general definition of the join function for the state monad set for applying it to costs and language elements.
I just want to interrupt, Joe, and say this is the clearest presentation you've given, and represents a significant advance in towards common understanding. So I'm super happy.
And it's good, and I like
awesome.
And I like to work from the spec because primarily once we've defined the spec, the code is going to be much easier to write.
Yes.
So I want people to understand that this isn't us overthinking a problem that we're trying to solve. What we're trying to do here is think less overall.
Absolutely. Yes.
That's the entire goal of creating a spec in the first place.
I have to interject. I'm sorry. I don't mean to hijack your update, but yesterday my son, who is very much an autodidact, he breezes through school, and so his learning he has to take complete control of. He's been teaching himself to write games, and of course, all the gaming languages are OO, and he comes to me and he says, so why would I ever? OO seems so natural for writing games. How would you possibly do this in a functional style? And then my answer was, monads are the new object.
Yeah, exactly. There are our level of abstraction. They're essentially the abstraction unit that's corresponds to an object in Java. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly right.
These were except these were created before Java had spread to the edge of the universe.
That's right. That's right. Yes.
Um,
Anyway, keep going. You know, but can you save a little bit of time because I have some other technical gadgets to share with the community.
Sure, of course. I'll get about 5 more minutes. Is that all right? Okay, cool. So fmap is essentially our sequencing function. And this is where things get kind of cool. It takes an annotation, right? And remember, we can write this essentially as something that takes a row and returns a new row along with the cost, right? So that's what our annotation actually is. Though this is a function that is yet to be executed. So essentially, you know, like if you want to think of this at a high level, this allows you to create kind of a network of annotations before any of them are actually executed. Okay, so it takes an annotation, right? And what it's going to do is unpack this annotation, take out the value or the cost here, right? And map this cost to a new annotation. So it says, okay, you give me the cost that I've returned from the first one, and I'll return to you an annotation for the next element, right? So we can see as an intermediate step, which is never shown in the presentation of fmap, and it really irritates me, an intermediate step that says, okay, I'm going to map this t to something that takes a row prime and returns a row double prime along with the cost of t plus that new cost of t. And the second part is not something that's actually normally included in the state monad. But since we want to accumulate our costs as we create our annotations, we're going to add this. And it actually turns out to be very, very useful. Okay, so after applying or after mapping t to this other one, what we essentially see is a computation that takes the first element, returns that element, right? And then threads, passes this updated element, this updated language element, to a new computation, right? So we're threading this one through. And then what we're turning on the other side, okay, is a row. So that updated element again. But of course, it could be that we've created an entirely new element here. And I have an example below that'll show that. Along with the cost of this first one, right? And the cost returned by the element that we've added, right? So this is kind of the action of being able to thread through the element that we're annotating through a series of annotations, right? And the cool part is, of course, because it's a monad, that what we get on the other side, or in total, is a function that takes a row and returns a row and a cost, which is, as we said, the definition of our NOT, right? So, for example, we can look at a multiplication operator. If we want to flat map an annotation of, or fmap, an annotation of a multiplication operator, right? All we need is, remember, an annotation, so that's this guy, and we need a function that takes the cost and returns a new annotation, and that's k here. So we can define this as we're going to let quantity 5, where quantity 5 is one of the things of which we're taking products, so one of the arguments to this, right? And we're going to annotate one of the arguments, all right? And we're going to return the cost of that argument, right? And say this is an integer, well, we've just got the cost of an integer here, okay? And continuing, we're going to take the cost that we got from that guy and hand it to k, right? And k is going to go off and find us a function that's going to, or it's going to find us a function that takes a row and returns a row again, right? Okay, so after we've evaluated this, what we're going to do is pass in the old state, right? The one that we've returned, okay? And that's going to return us a quantity 6 prime, where quantity 6 prime is the other argument of the multiplication. And we're also going to get the cost of the quantity 6 prime, okay? And at the end of that, what we have to do is add the cost of our multiplication operator. So in the midst of, or by simply annotating a Q-mult or multiplication operator. What we get is in fact an annotation of all of the arguments to the multiplication, right? And we get and that way we only have to express it essentially as one or as a single cost here. So cost of Q6 actually also includes cost of Q5. And then essentially all we're responsible for doing is adding the cost of Q-mult, right? So remember, what we've gotten in total is something that takes a row and returns that row along with its cost. And there are a number of other examples that I prepared, but since we're trying to conserve time, I'll yield the time back to the community.
Thank you. That's a great update. I really appreciate that, and I hope people understand, so the value of the approach. If effectively, the argument I've been making since about 2007, along with a giant swath of the rest of the computing community, is that monadic organization of computation results in just huge amounts of software reuse. That just so much of what we normally do in computing, whether it's big data or it's static analysis, like Joe is doing right here, benefits from being structured along the monadic design patterns.
Exactly, and for anybody who's on the Discord channel, there is a channel called Row Economics, and that's a channel for all members who are curious about the cost model, so everyone essentially knows where their rev are being spent and why they are being spent, because I want this to be a very, very transparent part of development. So if you have any questions, feel free to pose them there and I'll respond in kind.
That's awesome.
Awesome, Joe. Yeah, it's great to see this. I wish I understood it more deeply, but it's great to see the progress. Hey, I wanted to make sure we introduce a few folks, beginning with Roland here. Roland, you want to introduce yourself and say hi?
So my name's Roland Waters, and I was introduced to Ed through mutual friends who are in the greater Seattle startup community, et cetera, et cetera. A brief bit about my background. I've been relatively dev heavy, although I've started two companies. One worked, which was RChain. Sony bought that. That's the basis, or was the in-game basis of the PlayStation Network. And then there was another company trying to blend exercise equipment and games that was a great idea, but didn't go well and taught me a lot about what a market needs to have before you did that. I'm also done other stuff, but you can go find me on LinkedIn and that'll tell you everything you need to know.
Awesome. Yeah, so Roland and we are, exploring different roles that he might fill in RChain Holdings and with application development and biz dev and so forth. So, and then I also want to recognize there's a couple other names I don't remember. I may have talked to one or both of you, but I don't remember if you've been on the Hangouts before. There's Alex and Vivek. You want to say hi?
Hey guys, Vivek here from India. Jacob introduced me to RChain. We both went to business school together. I can't say I understand all of the technology, but been really interested in some of the problems that RChain is solving. So happy to evangelize RChain in this part of the world. Had a conversation with Nash yesterday around how we can find good Scala developers in India, and looking forward to contribute to the community.
That's great, Vivek. What city are you from?
I'm in Mumbai right now.
Awesome.
Fantastic. Well, welcome to both Roland and Vivek. That's great. Any other community members who wanted to recognize? Ed?
No, again, an invitation to Alex if he wants to say anything, but I'm good, thank you.
Oh, very good, very good. Cool. I wanted to mention also that I've done some significant updates on the flight back from New Zealand. Did some significant updates to the Y paper. And I will be releasing that very shortly as a draft for comment. So look for that. And also I have, about 10 years ago, I came up with an approach to the reasoning about graph theory that was in some ways inspired by the work of Gelly, Cardelli, and Gardner, and their approach to representing graphs in process algebras. But effectively, I was thinking hard about how to do a monadic style presentation in the way that Joe has presented the cost model, and came up with a theory of graphs which has some enormous benefits with respect to managing complexity. And I was mentioning it to Mike, and Mike pointed out a couple of questions that he wanted clarity on, and asked for me to effectively write a little bit more down. So I took some of the time on the flight out to New Zealand, and then some more time on the flight back to write down the bones of the theory. And I have now posted that in the Ladle channel on Discord. So if you have interest in it, feel free to take a look. One of the striking features of the theory is that as the complexity of graphs, and then I show this through examples, as the complexity of the graph grows effectively exponentially, the specifications for the graphs remains constant. So the specifications for the graphs are all essentially one-liner programs, and this is because like most developers easily get this idea of recursive data types, and how when you have a good recursive data type, you can do a lot with sort of one-line recursive programs in terms of the specifications of certain kinds of calculations. And this is nowhere more evident than in the list data type. Every developer understands that a list is either the empty list or consing an element onto a list. So that's a nice, clear recursive spec that corresponds nicely to the operations on lists, and also enables nice specifications of calculations on lists. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, there's been kind of a gap in the mind of the community for a similar recursive, or I should say monadic presentation of the data type of graphs. And most libraries, packages, software tools, etc., and also most mathematical presentations of graphs present graphs as collections of nodes and edges. And not only is this ubiquitous, but it also infects other theories. For example, if you look at the presentation of category theory, it also presents categories in terms of objects and morphisms, and it doesn't present categories as a recursive data type. In most standard presentations, I'm not saying that there aren't some outliers there, but rather mainstream presentations of graph theory and category theory and lots of other graph theory influenced branches of mathematics or discourses in mathematics have this sort of strange missing presentation. And so this theory attempts to plug that hole and provide that, and the benefits are almost immediate in terms of complexity management. And the other piece of the puzzle here is that once you do that, then reflection is almost immediately available. And because you have the reflective tools, we can then make a connection between subtypes of the data type of graphs derived by probing graphs through functions, right? So it's easy to think about the domain of natural numbers, or the domain of counting numbers. And then you can talk about graphs that could be organized as functions from the natural numbers into graphs, right? So the obvious one is the discrete graph, in which none of the nodes in the graph or the vertices in the graph are connected, right? So you can easily see how you can build a map from the domain of natural numbers into the domain of discrete graphs. That's an obvious one. And each of these functions gives you a kind of subtype of the data type of graphs, or the domain of graphs. And what on the other hand, as we've kind of mentioned before, the Ladle algorithm provides another way of thinking about subtypes. It provides a different way of conceptualizing how you arrive at subtypes. And then the question is, how do these two notions of subtyping coincide? And with the reflective machinery, you can provide a minimal answer. You can say, here's the domain in which those two kinds of subtyping conceptualizations become unified. And so there's a single one-line equation that picks out that minimal model where the two different ways of thinking about subtyping coincide. And those are all in the notes, and there are lots of other observations there as well. Be very happy to have eyes on the theory, largely because with the little work, we need a nice way of reasoning about graphs, and this is one approach. And so if people want to give it some attention, and especially if they spot any bugs, very, very happy to hear about those. Any other comments as well? So it has a general interest for programmers who deal with graphs as data types, because it gives a much better handle on the complexity of many kinds of graphs. But also it has a specific interest because when we are reasoning about, when we're employing the Ladle algorithm in a setting where we do have the rewrite rules, then reasoning about those graphs becomes critical, and this gives a tool for reasoning about those graphs. I should mention that part of the inspiration for the work was in thinking about how to characterize graphs. Mike Stay posed a very framed a question about the sort of logic of graphs in terms of the Sheffer stroke. And I think that inspired, he posed the question to the categories list, and there was a good response, and I was particularly inspired by the way Mike framed the question. I'm not sure if many people know this, but both scientists and mathematicians are more interested in questions often than we are in answers. An answer is good if it generates better questions. So I was particularly excited about the way Mike framed the question, and I have some noodling about how to use this framework to go after Mike's question of graph logics in terms of the Sheffer stroke. So that was another inspiration for the work. So I just wanted to pass along that was a piece of work that I was able to get done when I had a few spare moments, and would love to get some feedback on the work, especially because it may dramatically improve our implementations of the Ladle algorithm. I think that's it for me. We're 1 minute over. Any questions, comments, any thoughts, feedback from the community on anything that we've talked about today?
Do you have any input as to where the conference is in New York, and whether it's easy to attend or if there's a high cost of attendance?
I don't know the details, but I can get them to you. Yeah, I'll let you know. Cool.
the Internet Identity Workshop and Rebuilding the Web of Trust conferences are coming up. I don't know if anybody is attending those. There are people from Big Life attending. And I'll be at IIW in Mountain View on the 17th. But it would be good if somebody could do a presentation or something at these events.
Right now I'm completely slammed, but I know that Ed has had folks looking at identity.
Yeah, I may go to that, Jim.
Awesome. I think it's right after the developer summit, or does it conflict?
It doesn't conflict. I forget if it's before or after. I think it's before.
Fantastic. That's really cool. You know, Jim, I've been thinking a lot about you and your multi-factor authentication ideas, especially from the point of view of this this thought I have that I you know, when we talk about identity, what we're really talking about is quality of identity. And what that seems to come down to is across a number of different channels, there's certain expectation of behavior, right? So if I know I'm talking to the same person if I can send something to their email and get a response back through a text message, right? That's the kind of thing that it's an example of a much more general principle that we can easily express in process algebras and in behavioral types on process algebras, or process calculi, I should say. And so I've been thinking a lot about how to characterize that, you know, a quality of identity through those kinds of things. And it seemed to me that the multi-factor was just the first set of intuitions about this much more general principle of you know, essentially consistent behavior across a range of channels.
Yeah. The presence measure or authentication factors, along with your connection, you know, your connections with other people in what's becoming the social ledger, which is everything we say and do, ultimately, your identity. But yeah, the strength of presence and the strength of the identity and the persona, you know, whether or not you know the person's name or address is what you need in order to have a reasonably safe interaction with another person.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's very interesting. Yeah, I'm thinking a lot about it. So hopefully I'll begin to commit some thoughts to paper in the not too distant future.
It's interesting, you know. I mean, I think you know, we definitely want to model our Ethereum contracts and Roland and such. I hadn't thought about applying that to the identity functions, which, you know, simply looking at as, you know, claims and attestations at this point.
Yeah, no, I'm thinking of it. I'm thinking of it slightly differently, but I'm not at a point where I can really articulate the intuitions that are coming in. Well, thanks again to everyone. As always, Christian, thank you for you know, hosting the meeting and doing the work to get this put out there to the community.
No problem. No problem.
You know, my friend
Thank you.
Vivek just had a great idea. Greg, I wanted your input on it. He's asking me, is there like a RChain theory for dummies for like people like you and me? He's telling me, because I mean, I love the elegance and the concepts, but obviously the math goes over so many of our heads. I think a lot of the work and your writing kind of points at it, but it's never really been written out like RChain theory for dummies.
It's you know, I think it's going to be an ongoing thing. Yeah, there's the communication process is it seems to be never ending. I'm not sure that there's going to be one document or one communication event that's going to handle those kinds of inquiries, because everyone comes from a slightly different perspective, and each person has slightly different learning modalities. But yes, there, you know, we're doing it the best we can to try to consolidate a lot of these ideas. And over the next year, you know, please look for those kinds of things, and don't stop asking. You know? keep asking. Probably the first step is, I mean, there are lots of tutorials on the mobile process algebras. So you can easily come up to speed on the mobile process algebras if you truly want to. There are many, it became a cottage industry to provide tutorials for mobile process algebras. Likewise, there was a cottage industry, a significant, from about 2006 onward, to explain monads to the wider community, because they have such significant import in the structuring of computation. So, and now the intersection of monads and process calculi kinds of constructs is newer, and that's what all of the tutorials around Rolang will eventually address. So yes, we're definitely going to be producing those. And then there are two other major innovations here. One is the ladle algorithm, and we're just now at the point where we have nailed down all of the technical questions to the level of specificity and generality at the same time that we want. So once we're able to inhabit that perspective for a while, we can start writing tutorials and explanations for people without the same many year investment in the technical apparatus. And then the other big piece of the puzzle, of course, is explaining consensus. And I know that Vlad has done just a heroic effort to try to explain distributed consensus to a wider audience, and what proof of work and proof of stake, how they fit into that larger picture. So he's produced a few papers, but this is also going to be a multi-year ongoing effort to try to get it into a place where people can people without, you know, a 10+ year investment in the literature can understand it. So the short answer is, you know, there are lots of tutorials out there. Having them all in one place, having them all under a single rubric doesn't exist. But we're hoping to get there, you know, as fast as we can. If there's any efforts that you or Vivek or people that you know want to put in to help us get there, great.
Yeah, I'll participate. Put an issue on GitHub, or maybe there is one. You know, I think people don't want to know the detail, but they want to know the implications of the mathematics. And
Yeah.
you know, although this may not be intuitive, this is the result.
Yes. You know, and I'll just say this one more thing, and then I have to dash off to a meeting. But a lot of times, even just stating the result in a way that feels both accurate and compelling, it requires a framing language, and getting to that framing language usually takes a certain amount of effort on both parties, right? So you have the person who's kind of receiving the information and the person who's delivering the information, or the agents who are receiving and delivering, and they have to kind of agree on a framing language before the significance of the results can have their full and true import, and that therein lies most of the work.
Yeah, I find, starting with the analogy, the internet is asynchronous communicating processes. And that puts it in a frame where they can understand what it is we're talking about to begin with.
Yeah. That's certainly an avenue of approach for sure. That's very successful. Okay, guys, I got a dash, but this was good fun. And please come to the membership meeting. All right, talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.